Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We've got a good show lined up for you today, just taking a high look at the free agency market, including our own free agencies and comparing those to outside free agencies. Again, a high level look, just to kind of see what's out there, what options are available to the Seahawks. Last show, we did a salary cap look at the roster building exercise we do every year. We've kind of established that we're certainly in the hole right now, but that's not going to be the case by the time free agency rolls around. You can easily create anywhere from, on the low end, $40 million, on the high end to $75, $80 million. I think Keith and I, coming into this show, will have a ballpark figure of around $65, $70 million, just to kind of play with as we talk about numbers and just kind of throw around general ideas of what we think we can do, including re-signing a couple of guys we think we're going to re-sign that are unrestricted from the current roster. So welcome in, Keith. Lots of information to talk about today. How you doing?
Doing good. I wish we had more information to talk about, because I wish we had offensive coordinator news.
Yeah, right.
We pushed recording back to mid-morning instead of first thing in the morning, hoping that news would drop today. It still feels like that we might hear something today, just because they did all of the second round of interviews over the weekend. I'm a little surprised we haven't heard anything yet. It's probably going to drop the moment we stop recording, because that's the way the news stuff works with you and I. And we'll have to be back later to do our
little add-on show.
Yep, for that. But at least it'll keep us focused this time. We can actually have our topic and spend time on it. So let's do that.
I was just gonna say that I will continue to refresh until we end this recording, just in case. But we are here to talk about free agents, and I thought we'd just kind of go through all the position groups, because it's just easier that way rather than single out a few. And if we keep this kind of at a higher level, I think we can get through the entire list, within an hour. And that's kind of where we're at for recording shows anyway. So why don't we start with quarterbacks? Last show, we kind of established that we believe that Geno will be back in 2025 on the roster. We don't think he's going to play for the full $44 million amount as far as the cap impact, that they will somehow restructure his deal to add a couple years and maybe even a dead year and get his number down to a reasonable level. And reasonable to us is, mid-20s to top end $30 million under contract in 2025. That gives us some additional savings to add to the pile that we need to get our deficit down to net zero, and then continue to build that amount available to the Seahawks in free agency up to around $65 million. I think that's the minimum threshold the Seahawks will need in order to re-sign a couple of guys that they have of their own free agency and go out and really upgrade the roster at a couple key positions, specifically interior offensive line. So in order to do that, that's kind of where we're at. Let's talk about quarterback, Keith. Out there, if they decide to move on from Geno, what's out there and what are we looking at?
So there's not a lot out there. There never is, right? It's a quarterback market. It's pretty rare that a decent one actually is available. Sam Darnold is a name that will generate a lot of interest given the year he had in Minnesota. He looked great all year.
Let's stop there for half a second. Let's talk about the realistic avenue of him actually reaching free agency, and what kind of a market would you expect that to be?
So realistically, I think the chances are very limited. The Vikings won 14 games this year with him at quarterback. They are almost certainly going to re-sign him. They will do so at a rate that gives them, he's going to want a decent contract, but they're not going to like break the bank for a guy who's had one good year. Um, uh, I would say he's probably going to have, 4 or 5 years, $150 million dollar contract, so pretty big numbers, but something that they can manipulate this first year to keep the number down for the first couple of years and continue to build and hopefully be a
How much guaranteed money in that?
um,
65, 70 million?
something like
Half of
that.
it,
Yeah,
half of it.
yeah.
I can see that. I really can. It seems odd and just crazy to talk about numbers like that for a quarterback like Sam Darnold. He did have that great season, fell apart a little bit in the postseason. Some of that was interior offensive line issues
Hmm.
that they had and injuries and so forth. But I agree. What do you do with JJ McCarthy at that point? Do they make him available? Maybe for the right number, they would, right compensation, but it also makes sense to have a very inexpensive quarterback on your roster, technically still a rookie since he was injured and out all season. Did not count towards an accrued season for him. So, what are your thoughts on JJ McCarthy?
Well, my guess is that he will probably be made available for the right compensation package because if they want to build and continue to build it around um, Sam Darnold and this team that won 14 games, um, they're going to want the draft picks that they can get and the ability to get better
Yeah,
elsewhere.
they
And
wouldn't really need a player of JJ McCarthy's ability to be a backup
yeah, and well, he's at this point potential.
potential.
Um,
Right.
and so yeah, he's a guy that is very interesting and is there, and yeah, he's cheap
Would the Seahawks be
relative and all
interested
of
in
that.
JJ McCarthy?
But if you're the Vikings and you can get a first round pick for your backup quarterback, you do it because backup quarterbacks are not worth first round picks. Um, and so yeah, the Seahawks would be absolutely interested if he becomes available. If Seattle can go get him for the 18th overall pick. Um, a guy
I think
that's that at
I think
his
that
age, he's only 21 now.
yeah, and that's why I think the frenzy would be a little bit more than a first round pick. Unfortunately, personal opinion. I I can see the 18th overall, but that's kind of in a wishful thinking mode to me. I think that it's probably going to end up being something like a first and a 2026 third or something like that, or a conditional. Like that's the second pick would be a kind of a conditional. Does he start? If he starts, the third is activated. If not, it goes away or reverts to a fifth or something like that.
Yeah,
To
something
me,
like that.
that's realistic.
That is realistic, especially if it's stretched out over 2 years. The thing is, he was worth a first round pick last year, and then didn't play. So why is he worth more now? Um, and that is kind of the when you start looking at the market, that's kind of the lens that I would look through. Is you had a bunch of quarterback needy teams get quarterbacks last year, um, and 5 of them um, no longer need a quarterback, and so that diminishes the market. And again, this is a guy that was um, worth a first round pick last year, and not even a top like 5 pick.
Yeah,
I don't think he's going to be.
but
He's worth
a top 10
suddenly worth
pick.
a. So I don't think
The
he's suddenly
reason
worth
that
a
I
lot more now.
the reason that I do is that I think you can't um, you undervalue a little bit the idea of seasoning in the NFL, whether or not you get on the
There
field
is
or
no
not.
seasoning. He didn't play. He was on
Yeah,
injured
but
reserve the whole year.
he
He didn't
was
even practice.
he was part of the meetings, all that kind of stuff. I get that he didn't practice physically, but taking mental reps, having the quarterback coach in his ear all the time with regards to here's what we would do in this situation. I mean, constant teaching mode. Those things are valuable. I think that you take a look at the market itself, and then you take a look at the incoming class of quarterbacks, and that's why his price goes up a little bit. Personally.
Yeah.
So beyond Sam Darnold, and potentially JJ McCarthy. Who else is out there?
A whole lot of nothing. The only guy that I mean, I think Justin Fields' life as a starter has reached an end when he lost his job again this year.
Maybe.
I
think
mean,
he showed his limitations better.
Yeah. You look
in
at
that he's more of a running guy, gimmicky guy. You can run some formations around him, but he's to be your primary starter in a passing league is could be questionable for him. I agree.
But you'd have to, I mean, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Drew Lock, Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, Mac Jones.
Jones.
Who here is someone that you want?
I could see somebody investing a little bit of backup, just as a backup, bring him in as a backup and see what you've got in Daniel Jones. I could see that because of the situation that he really came out of, didn't really have a chance in Minnesota because he didn't need to. And I could see somebody taking a peek. But everyone else is a career backup at this point.
Yeah. I mean, if you are looking at, especially
Russell Wilson it would be a player that would be a bridge guy.
Russ
that
is
you would
going
bring
back
in.
to Minnesota, isn't he? Or not Minnesota, but Pittsburgh.
I would think, but he's got to sign a contract, and so I don't know how you establish value for Russell Wilson at this point, and whether he's humble enough to accept his current value. That remains to be seen. Now, does Russell Wilson have value as a quarterback? Yes, I think he does. And I think that he could be similar in a role that Geno Smith was when he was a backup. So you have a bridge quarterback that could come in and start for you, but you're bringing along a younger quarterback of the future. And that's, I think, where Russell Wilson fits.
But that's not Seattle, right?
Not currently.
Yeah.
If I was Seattle, I would see if Justin Fields could come along. I might take a flyer on that.
Yeah, why not? Especially
I would prefer JJ McCarthy, but you've got to figure out the compensation. Now, if you get your quarterback of the future, a first and a third is totally worth it. It's painful. Yes, obviously painful, but it's worth it. And so I would not, if Seattle decided to go that way, I would applaud that deal all day long, just because they've done their research. They know what they're going to get, and they're committed. And depending on the offense that we run, the OC that we get, it could be a perfect fit.
I mean, that's the thing is, if you're going that route, you got to know what you're getting, and you got to build an offense around a guy that runs well and throws okay.
Average. He could be Brock Purdy, or he could be Sam Darnold. Not Sam Darnold. Who is the oldest free agent you mentioned in your list? Redhead guy.
Andy Dalton.
And he could be Andy Dalton.
But Andy Dalton can't run.
Right, but he could be Andy Dalton plus. Like he could give you a little bit of run pass option kind of stuff. But I think he could run an offense efficiently in the NFL. I think he's an efficient
potential
point guard kind of a guy.
Potentially,
yes.
Yeah,
okay, so let's move on off.
There's a lot of guys that you could bring in if you drafted a rookie quarterback and you're one of those teams, and you wanted to bring in a guy that is going to compete with them, maybe start the first 6 games, that kind of deal. There's a lot of guys that fit that mold, not a guy that you're going to hang your hat on and be like, this is our guy for the next 8 years and going to go win us a Super Bowl. There just isn't. There never is.
Yeah. So if you're drafting at the top of the draft, or you're tapping one of the top 2 or 3, 4 quarterbacks in this league, and you want a guy to come in like Jimmy Garoppolo or Mariota or Jameis Winston or Flacco or whatever, those guys are, that's what that's for. All right. Which group do you want to talk about next?
Well, let's look at running back.
Okay. I like the running back.
Yeah, the Seahawks don't really have a need in that they've got their 2 guys. They've really got their 3 guys because McIntosh showed enough this year that I think that you have to continue to let that go. As far as free agent goes, what's out there? The running back position is never a great market because guys tend to not last on their second contract. And so you got to take anyone who's available and think, okay, they're probably not going to be worth what they've been worth the last few years. And there's just not a lot of great out there. Cam Akers is an interesting name. He's only 25. For some reason, has all the talent in the world, but tends to end up playing his way not into a starting spot and have coaches wanting to go with someone else and then bringing him on later. It's happened in multiple teams, multiple years. I don't really see a great fit on any of these players for Seattle, but
well, I'll tell you, it really does. It's going to depend a little bit on the OC thing now and the team identity. Now, Mike McDonald's come out many times and said, our identity, we want the identity on the defense and the offense to be married up. And it certainly wasn't. It's like they finally got a little physical on defense. I think they need a couple pieces to kind of reinforce that. But on offense, they had no identity whatsoever. And if they want to be a physical run oriented team, and it looks like that's maybe what they want to do, and that's what Mike McDonald says he wants, I take him for his word. And does Ken Walker fit that bill? And if he doesn't, is Ken Walker available on the market for a fourth round pick or whatever? And you go get a running back that fits more of the identity you want to establish. I think.
Well, to me, it depends on
Zach Charbonnet does that.
Who he hires.
But
because if you bring in Clint Kubiak and they're going to run outside zone, seriously, you want Ken Walker on that roster.
I think so. Absolutely.
He's going to be a 1,400 yard runner.
But if he brings in a Fraley from Detroit,
yeah, then
maybe you want a guy like the Javonte Williams or Najee Harris instead.
Yeah, I don't know. You look at Detroit, and they had Gibbs, right?
They did. They certainly did.
And he's not a power runner. He's a fast, flashy guy, and they knew how to take advantage of that. And I mean, that's who Walker is too. So, but Najee Harris is an interesting name. If you want a power runner that's going to run downhill between the tackles and knock people over, that's an interesting name. He's only 26 right now, 4 years in the league, so he's probably got still a little bit of tread on the tires. That would be an interesting name.
And Javonte Williams, I think in Denver, age 25, would be another name to look at as well. Nick Chubb's out there, but you'd have to kind of kick the tires and figure out the health situation on Nick. But I love that running style. I like his passion. He's just been injured so many times.
29 and he's already can't stay healthy.
And his body is 35. I get that. I do. There's a few other guys. Jaylen Warren, Pittsburgh, Aaron Jones, Minnesota. Don't know if he's going to be available. None of these guys may not be available. I'm just saying right now, as of before free agency begins, these guys are currently unrestricted. We'll see what happens. How about wide receiver, Keith? I know that Seattle is good at the top, depending, right? They want to maybe potentially restructure DK Metcalf. We know Njigba is going to be great. It looks like Tyler Lockett's probably going to move on. If not, if he resigns or whatever, I still think that's a much diminished role. You really need a number 3 wide receiver in this room. I like the wide receiver class overall, but
there's a lot of names here.
There's a lot of names, but I think you're going to overpay for like the majority of the top 10, which I don't really want to do. I think Dwami Brown at Washington, age 25, and I looked at him in the playoffs, and he really kind of came through in clutch moments. A player like that's very appealing to me, but he is not probably going to reach free agency. Currently unrestricted, but that's probably going to change.
Well, you're looking for in Seattle. You're looking for a third receiver.
Exactly.
So you want to pay for a third receiver. Sorry.
Bless you.
And so, yeah, I mean, that is. I look at DeMarcus Robinson with the Rams. is a guy that is a third receiver. Maybe you see if Keenan Allen's willing to play for a lot less, so that way he can be on a team that isn't awful for the first time in his career. Maybe. Um, yeah,
Right.
there's it, looking at okay, we need a guy that we know we can depend on as a third receiver, um, and doesn't want first receiver money. Like
Right.
I'm struggling to find that guy on this list, and that's really what it comes down to me, and why I think you have to go um, the draft route to get the guy that you're looking for.
I do
Maybe
too.
David Moore, but he's 30. Do you want to? I mean, I guess if you're looking at a 1 year or 2 year rental on a guy to try and take advantage of the window you have now,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I would say
You,
Duami Brown, just because, but I don't think Washington's going to let him go. And I agree with you for the most part. Like, you don't want to overpay for a number 3 and number 4 wide receiver. You just don't. I think that
mhm,
that market kind of develops on the second, third week of free agency. And we'll see how that goes. And I certainly think they probably sign somebody as a
mhm,
minimum as a draft hedge. But I think really when you're talking about a number 3 wide receiver, you can get those guys in the draft through round 3, maybe even into round 4. A guy that you're going to target, 40 times to 50 times a year with 40 receptions, 600 yards, 500 yards, and 3 or 4 touchdowns tops. I mean, that's kind of what you're looking for, and you can get those guys in the draft. And
mhm.
because you're not going to spend a lot of money. And the Seahawks don't have a lot of money to just throw around at a third wide receiver. You're not going to spend $7 million, $8 million. You're just not. So I think Seattle kind of needs to get that out of its head that we're probably not going to spend a lot of money at this position.
Yeah,
How about tight end? I know that, we talk about Noah Fant potentially being a cap casualty. If they decide to do that, I can tell you right now, the free agent market at tight end position is not where you're going to find that tight end.
it's not. Man, this is a hard group. I mean, you look at the list, and you know,
It's bleak.
Pharaoh Brown is
Austin
not.
Hooper, right?
I mean, right. So Tyler Conklin is probably going to be worth or going to cost you more than it would be to keep Fant. So you
I
would just do
agree.
that.
Same with
And then
Mike Gesicki and Zach Ertz. Those guys are going to be, and I
Ernst might
probably
be
wouldn't,
Ernst is 35 and only made $3 million last year. And that
but he's
he
done.
also can't
He's
block.
baked. Right. You go look at him play, especially in the playoffs, and he was non-existent, non-factor.
Yeah. So I don't see the reason why you would go that route. Um,
Yeah, Juwan Johnson, Tommy Tremble, Jordan Atkins, John Bates, Hunter Long, those names are out there, but really, you
mhm,
only would go that route if the Seahawks believe that AJ Barner is a true number 1 tight end on your roster and can probably be targeted instead of having 30 targets. You'd have to bump him up to like 65, 70 targets in order to bring in like a second fiddle. Otherwise you're going to keep Noah Fant for another year. You're going to figure out a way to make it work on the cap, and you're going to pair those guys up again, run that back, and see how AJ Barner develops for year 2, and then
mhm.
go from there.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down. This is not a good free agent class at tight end. So I
No,
think that's
but it
going to
is good in the
limit what you
draft.
do. Yeah.
It is. There's a lot of depth availability in the draft at tight end, and we'll talk about that as time goes on. Let's talk about your specialty, Keith. Interior offensive line, maybe even go into offensive tackle if you want to. Just talk to me in general about what you're seeing out in early free agency and and if that lines up with what the needs are.
So there's some names in here, guys that are really interesting to me. Ben Bresden from the Buccaneers, I'd take in a heartbeat. Maybe James Daniels from the Steelers if he is healthy, and you kick the tires on that. And his medicals come back clear. But yeah, there's some guys. I don't know if Seattle's going to spend the um, to spend the salary cap room on this position. They haven't um, under Schneider, and
What
that's
are they going to spend their cap on?
probably defensive line and corner, or I don't know, not interior offensive line because it seems that it's not a priority.
Well, everyone is certainly shouting at John Schneider, figuratively, obviously, to fix this situation. It seems like the situation, which is poor offensive line performance, is the thing that's holding back
Yes,
not only Geno Smith
I would
potentially,
agree with
but
that.
the entire offense in being able to have a complete team.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Um, yeah, I mean that you're
I
not
don't see them
wrong.
going after Trey Smith at guard. In fact, Trey Smith, I'm sure, will be franchised and won't hit the market. But there are other names out there
Yeah,
um, available that they could even placeholder guys like Kevin Zeitler from Detroit. He's 34 years old, but he's a guy that can competently come in and play a season for you while you figure out your left guard spot. Drew Dahlman
yeah,
would be a clear upgrade at offensive center. He's going to cost some money. You're going to spend 14 or 15 million dollars a year on him, but your cap hit could be lower, and you could
yeah, but
solve your offensive center position for 4 or 5 years. Is that worth it? The vast majority of the Seahawks fan base would say absolutely.
I don't think you have to go that expensive to find the guy that's gonna be the upgrade and long term solution. Like Josh Myers from the Packers would be a great one. Plus, he's got a great last name. Sorry. And then Liam Eichenberg from the Dolphins. Both those guys, 27, um, coming off good years, play for really strong offensive lines and do some great things, technically in terms of like their technique and everything. I think they would be massive upgrades at center, and it would give you stability there for the next few years, and I don't think that would cost as much. So um, I could see them doing that. Yeah, and then left guard, yeah, you got to get away from, uh, you know, the got to get away from the old guys that don't have it anymore. You can't bring back a Laken Tomlinson and or anyone in that like realm. Guys that are washed. You need to go find an
So no
upgrade.
Zach Martin's age 34. Those guys are done.
I wouldn't know. I mean, and Zach Martin used to be such a great player. But I wouldn't go that route. I mean, a 1 year prove it deal to see if he's healthy on a Dan Freeney. If you're desperate and you don't get one of the names, like I said, Ben Breaston would be is the cream of the crop at guard. Um, that I could see the team looking at and deciding ultimately they can't afford because someone's going to pay them $15 million, and I
Yeah,
don't think
they
Schneider will
may
ever
look
pay a
at
guard that.
Tevin Jenkins, Dalton Risner, um, who else is on? Will Hernandez potentially, James
Mm-hmm.
Daniels from Pittsburgh. There's some names. Now I'd have to take a deeper dive, which I have not recently on a few of those guys to find out exactly where they're at with health and the playing performances on the field, obviously, and so forth. But the dream scenario would be Trey Smith. You throw everything you can at getting a guy like that for me, I think.
Yeah.
And if he hits the open market, I think you try to be in that market and find out if you can do a deal.
Yeah.
If on the center side, I would even take a guy like Ryan Kelly to come in at age 32 to maybe give you a couple of years at the offensive center position that would kind of stabilize that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I
A
could
Drew
see that. It would
Dahlman
have.
again. I would spend a little bit of money on a Drew Dahlman. I just would. Come in, almost I don't remember exactly where he was drafted, but it was late, like sixth round, seventh round, undrafted. In the last 4 years, he's just really kind of come into his own and played well. He's going to
He
get
only
paid this time.
he only played 48% of the snaps for his team last year, and so I would be, you gotta look at those medicals and make
Mm-hmm.
sure he's
Agreed.
gonna be a thing. And that's Ryan Kelly too, was at 55%. So both those guys banged up a lot last year, and I want to see where they're at. Um, yeah, I mean,
Okay. How
there's
about
names, there's expensive ones, there's medium ones, there's really cheap ones. Where does the team want to go? I hope they don't go super cheap, because we saw what happens when they go super cheap. It just isn't pretty.
yeah, agreed. Okay. How about Mika Becton? He's sometimes listed as a tackle. He's played guard this year in Philadelphia, age 26. He's got that scheme diversity for you.
Hmm. I'd
I
like
think that
that
they
move.
may make a run at somebody like that. That's going to be not the most expensive guy, but a
Yep.
guy that can come in and really hold it down for you for a while. How about other offensive tackles? Or are we even in the market? I know that we're in
Uh,
the market for a swing tackle, and you should be able to pick that up in the draft, but they're going to be having hedge. Is
yeah,
that currently on the roster? That's the question.
that's the question. It depends on their thoughts on their
Gerald.
the yeah, Gerald, their 6th round pick from this last year. He looked okay for a little tiny bit, and then I think the wheels fell off. But he was a massive project and should not have gotten on the field in year one. I mean, that was never the plan.
And we're going to have a
Um,
new offensive line coach come in. We'll see what happens there. And then George Fant is still under contract. I think that he's
that's
probably a
true.
cut candidate, but they may elect to bring him back because maybe his injuries weren't related last year. And it was just bad luck, and maybe they
Hmm.
run that back as well.
Yeah, and maybe they look at that and go, he's a guy that we know we can trust at either spot if somebody gets hurt, and he's a true swing tackle. Um, yeah, Becton's an interesting name to me because he's a right tackle, a good one, but he can also push inside,
Mm-hmm.
and play guard at a high level too. Um,
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I mean, for me, that's the most attractive. You got Lyric, Jackson, Ronnie Stanley, Cam
yeah,
Robinson, Morgan Moses. There's some
there's some
guys.
there's some big names as far as like Tyron Smith, Cam Robinson, Ronnie
Mm-hmm.
Staley, Jeff Noblum. Um, there's some names here that are going to get paid, and they're going to DJ Humphreys with the Chiefs, that are going to eat up some of the market and allow you know less name driven players, but maybe better ones. Dylan Raduns from the Titans is an interesting name to me. 27 years old. He's a guy that you might be able to get for cheaper, and especially since you're looking for a swing tackle slash maybe guard, um, and then push outside if somebody gets hurt type of situation. Like, that would be great for Seattle. If they could get a guy that could come in and like just nail down that left guard spot, but then also be able to push outside and play tackle um, at a
Mm-hmm.
high level. Um, you get the upgrade and you get your swing tackle all in one player. So that would be kind of cool.
And we've given up on Stone Forsythe. I mean, that's our opinion. That the team may elect to do something different, but
He's an unrestricted free agent, and honestly, given the lack of quality that you've gotten from him over the last 4 years, why would you bring him back and not just draft another Stone Forsythe in the 6th round?
right.
Because that's what he was a 6th round pick. So
So let's move to the defense. Let's talk about the defensive line a little bit. Um, the Seahawks potentially could lose Jaron Reed, Jonathan Hankins, Roy Robertson Harris could be a cut candidate for sure. Dre Jones
hmm
as well. seems like Seattle is going to really need to remake their defensive line. And part
Mm-hmm.
of that is going to come from free agency, I would imagine. I just asked you where they're going to spend their money, and that was the first answer that you had. You have an idea
Yeah.
of what they might want to do?
Well, I think that, you can look and you can see some guys here. Javon Kinlaw would be a really interesting name, a guy that was essential to um, the 49ers at one point. Javon Hargrave is another one, but though he barely played last year. Um, to there's some names, some guys that are really interesting to me that you could bring in and um, upgrade the defensive line. But you're really looking at a certain kind of guy. You're looking at a guy that's, um, you're not looking at a 260-pound edge rusher because the Seahawks play a 3-4. You need either a 280 to 300-pound guy,
Edge
or you
setter.
need
Yep.
or you need a 360-pound guy that's going to hold down the center against the run. There's very few of those in existence. Honestly, looking at the list, the most likely name that they're going to bring in is the guy that's we already know, and that's Jerron Reed, to give them that third starter along with Williams
Mm-hmm.
and Murphy. That's not the giant nose tackle, but it still gives you a third, that third starter, and then you're working on trying to find depth and stuff around there. Um, if they're going to go outside the organization, a name to keep a mind on would be Lecky Fotu from the Jets. Guy was hurt all year, probably going to have to sign a 1-year prove it deal, but talented. There's a lot of talent there. That guy could be real good for them. Um,
Agreed.
and
I even think a guy like Greg Gaines could potentially come in.
yeah,
Seattle's fans
that's
are
another one.
familiar with the University of Washington guy.
Hmm.
BJ Hill is another guy.
There's a lot of different guys that would fit.
Puna
The neat
Ford's out there again. A guy like that would be an interesting
and
name
actually, and
for me.
he is a nose tackle.
Hmm.
That it was the previous coaching staff that gave up on him because they're
Hmm.
like, oh, he doesn't fit the scheme. But then their scheme was awful. And so maybe he's a guy that they want to get back in here because he's got some um he kind of fits what they need, and that's a guy that can be your nose, eat up blocks like freaking crazy, and then um, come off the field on obvious passing downs. Um, and he was a big part of the Chargers defense. That was a really good defense this year. I mean, he was just the guy right there in the middle. That would be kind of fun to have him back too.
Yeah, there's a couple other players, and I'm gonna have a hard time pronouncing these, so I'm gonna go very slow. Oda Jizua from Dallas, age 27, would be an interesting one. The other one was Levi Unwuzurike out of
From the
Detroit,
Lions.
age 27. Bobby
Yeah.
Brown is an interesting name to me. The Los Angeles Rams defensive tackle. I liked him coming out of college. I liked him for the Rams playing in the middle there, age 25. Yeah, there's a few other ones. Milton Williams, Philadelphia Eagles. How about edge players that you've got your Josh Sweats, your Chase Youngs? I don't think we necessarily need to be in the market for those. I think we can get a premier kind of guy if we wanted to, in the first round of the draft, for example.
Yeah.
But there are some other guys, Khalil Mack, DeMarcus Lawrence is getting older now. Maybe he'd be less expensive to come in. Malcolm Kuntz is a kind of an edge setting guy, age 27, similar to Uchenna Nwasu. That would be interesting to me. How about you?
I would say you look at a guy like Peyton Turner from the Saints. Um, More of a rotational guy currently, would be a rotational guy in Seattle because they've got their two starters, and so that's kind of more of a fit. I mean, if you're going to go spend the money on a name on a Chase Young or a Khalil Mack, you're spending the money on a starter, but you've got you've got really good players in Mafe and Hall. So I
Yes.
don't think spending the money there um, is a wise move. Now you need depth, you need rotational guys. You got to have guys that can rotate in. Um,
What do you think the
but
Seahawks do with Uchenna
uh,
this off season? He's got a
honestly,
big number. If they can rework it, I wouldn't mind having him back because
I wouldn't
I don't think
either.
his injuries are all related. It's been an unfortunate series of injuries that he's had the last 2 seasons, but he's a good player when he's on the field. Do
Hmm.
you do you do you cut that and take the cap number and reallocate that to a player that you know is a little bit more dependable? Or do you take your chances that he's going to be available and you go find a guy in the draft to supplement that?
I would find a guy in the draft that you could supplement with, um, simply because I think that uh, you're looking at a guy that um, they paid him because he was worth it because he was coming off just a monster year and looked like he was going to be great. And then he started out the next year and was playing at that level, but they've gotten almost nothing from him in over a year and a half. And so the production that he has produced, I know that's a lovely word, the sentence there, production produced. Um, but yeah, the production that they've gotten from him and his cap number are nowhere close to the same. And his production has been replaced by Hall. Um, and so I think that you can reallocate, go younger, go cheaper, and then use that some of that money to maybe help you improve your offensive line or find you that third receiver or an extra
Mm-hmm.
cornerback, something like that.
Interesting. All right. Seems like we're pretty good if we can re-sign Ernest Jones at
At
middle
linebacker.
linebacker. And then
Yep.
we've got Knight and a couple other, role player type guys on the back end of the roster. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, I would think that they'll look for depth in the draft and be okay. Maybe a low level free agent, but not a premier guy. If Ernest Jones were to leave for whatever reason, they would, I think, want to get some sort of a really sure-handed bridge guy to
Mm-hmm.
come in, like a Bobby Wagner or a Dre Greenlaw, for example. Um, or they have to spend draft capital pretty high to get
I
another
think
guy.
if they lose out um, on Ernest Jones, I could see them uh, breaking the bank for Zach Bond from the Eagles.
It's that important of a position to Mike McDonald,
Yeah, I honestly think it is. And you look
as proven out by this last season.
as proven out by both this last season and his time in um, Baltimore, where his defense worked its best and was the number one defense in the league once they uh, traded for Roddick to be their
Mm-hmm.
middle linebacker there. It is the way that everything works. You got to have that guy, and
For
he's
those of you that don't know Zach Bond, he's just a big downhill bruising kind of force in the middle there for Philadelphia.
oh yeah, he was a special teams player who the Eagles brought in and said, "Hey, we're going to give you a shot in the middle this year," and he was first team All Pro, and is a massive part of that defense and everything that they've done this year. The reason why they are in the NFC title game has a lot to do with their defense, and he was the big upgrade in that defense.
I don't see him being available on the
I
market,
don't
but
either.
anything can happen in the NFL. It's just crazy. But um, the other names out there, Bobby Wagner, obviously.
Mhm.
I think you're still going to spend $6 million a year on Bobby Wagner, and we all know the limitations and the benefits of Bobby. I could see a team like Seattle doing that for a season, honestly, and pairing him with Tyrese Knight until another linebacker situation became available to them. But it would be less than optimal. I mean, you miss out on Ernest Jones. as a franchise and as a front office, that's not a good look,
Mm-hmm.
especially how well he played and you traded for him and he said he wanted to be there and then you didn't get it done. That would not go well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How about, safety or cornerback? The secondary room for Seattle seems to be okay at safety, especially if you add Jarek Reed into the back end, a guy that could come back and play. He has been injured, hasn't really shown what he can do yet. There's a guy like that sitting out there, but Julian Love, Kobe Bryant really kind of nailed down that free safety side of the equation. To me, they're still missing that strong safety presence closer to the line of scrimmage that can really make a big difference in a Mike
Mm-hmm.
McDonald defense. They seem like they're using Witherspoon to kind of play this hybrid role off of playing cornerback for them, but also kind of coming up towards the line of scrimmage. It seems like they could use another big athlete in there. There's one name well, there's a couple names that I really like at safety in this free agency class, but one name stands out to me. Two names: Jeremy Chin and Hufanga from San Francisco are big, kind of strong safety types, play really well close to the line of scrimmage, and can really kind of set the tone for your defense.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeremy Chin is definitely man, he's only 27 too. That would be a fun addition.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
really, you're not wrong in that you've got your two guys, but both of them are natural free safeties in Julian Love and Kobe Bryant. And so when you want to play too deep, you've got two really good options there. But when you want one of them to rotate down and be that guy in the box, it's not a great fit. I mean, Julian Love does the job pretty well, but
And we had Rashawn Jenkins, and Rashawn Jenkins is under contract in
ugh,
2025. I
yeah, but
just don't think he's a good
no.
schematic fit as well as the cost versus production fit.
Yeah, and so when he was the guy that rotated down and was the strong safety, the defense was bad. And replacing him with Julian Love when Kobe Bryant came in and took over the back end was a big upgrade. And so that's the kind of thing that I look at and I go, okay, um, let's go ahead and just leave that. Um,
Well enough alone. Yes.
yeah, I'm like, it didn't work. So why would we go back to it again? Um, Julian Blackman from the Colts would be a guy
Mm-hmm.
that would be interesting. He's only 27. Um,
Cameron
yeah, it's
Bynum,
um, there are
Justin
some.
Simmons is out there.
It all comes down to what do you want to pay? Because
It
even
does.
if you look at Jarek Reed, who's like the third, um, the guy he's barely played over the last, since being drafted because he's been hurt. And you're like, okay, if he's finally healthy, where does he fit? Well, he's a slot. He's either a deep safety or a slot corner. He's not really a guy that plays up at the line of scrimmage. And
No. Yeah, we
yeah,
don't have anybody else on the roster. I mean, Ty Akota is out there as a kind of a practice squad level player.
yeah.
AJ Finley is the guy that they had laid on the roster. Don't know if they're going to bring him back. There's some names out there. Harrison Smith is out there. Trayvon Moring out of Las Vegas. Will Harris, New Orleans Saints. Some of these guys are going to play free more than strong. I think a perfect fit in this scheme for this defense is Jeremy Chin.
Hmm.
And if Washington lets him go, doesn't re-sign him, and he's out there, it would not surprise me if Mike McDonald goes and gets a guy like that can be a physical force, kind of enforcer on your team, scheme diverse, had some long speed, but it's a big guy that almost linebacker size, as far as the safety is concerned. And I think a guy like that would be a perfect fit. Otherwise, they may end up going out in the draft and going and getting a guy that they really like in the second round or third round, a guy that can compete right away for a starting role in the defense.
Hmm. Because there's other guys that I think they'd look good in a Seahawk uniform. Jason Pinnock. currently with the Giants, but you're looking at a scheme fit type of situation where do you need another guy that plays in the back? No, you need a guy that can play up in the line of scrimmage and be physical
Agreed.
and take on tight ends and be up there in the running game and that kind of stuff. Um, I mean, that's really, kind of looking at where where you need a guy. Are there any corners that you really like in this free agent class for Seattle?
Well, I mean, we could bring back DJ Reed. Now he's the highest rated corner in free agency.
Yeah,
And I'm pleased for him and his development while he's been with the Giants, or excuse me, with the Jets. But he's still only age 28, a little undersized still, but plays above his weight.
yeah,
And he would be an interesting guy, I like the guy Paulson Debo from New Orleans, age 26. I'm not real impressed with Byron Murphy now with Minnesota. Elijah Molden is kind of a slot guy that would be interesting to me to add to your team. Age 26. Carlton Davis, Mike Hughes, maybe Atlanta, age 28. Um,
What about a guy like Benjamin St. Just from Washington?
yeah, I mean he's undersized. He's really undersized though, isn't he, Keith?
He is, but if you're looking at DJ Reed, now you're looking at a guy that's going to cost you a quarter
Mm-hmm.
of that, and he gives you that slot
I think, yeah,
corner. That I mean, that's the thing is, what are you
I
going to
might go
do?
to like Asante Samuel Jr. maybe
Yeah,
from the Chargers in that role for that
but see,
spot.
how much are you willing to pay for that? Because you've got arguably the best slot corner in the NFL in Devin Witherspoon on your
Mm-hmm.
roster. Now, you don't want to
Mm-hmm.
use him in that role because you want him to be your Swiss Army knife and use him there or, as a pass rusher, as a safety, and put him outside and just move him all over the place because he's such a weapon. But um, are you willing to, you also have Josh Jobe, who went from being a not even on the roster to being on the
Right.
practice squad to being a
But is
very
he
bad
really
player to being a
the
great
guy?
player by the end. Um,
He's a great player in certain situations, but is he the
yeah,
guy that they really want to take forward to be the number two corner
no,
on the roster? What do
but
they
he
do
wouldn't be
with
the number
Woolen?
two. Now, okay,
Yeah,
now if you're looking at moving on from Woolen, like if they're gonna say they trade Woolen and then try and sign um, a guy to replace him, you know, um,
yeah,
you could
yeah,
bring back Michael Jackson for
yeah.
probably
You
not much,
could,
and at least then you'd have the physicality up against in the running game.
yeah.
Um,
I think I would. Yeah, you could hedge. I think you could hedge with a really guy like Michael Jackson. I think you could get Michael Jackson for under $7 million a year. You're still gonna have to spend draft capital on that. And potentially high draft capital to really kind of solidify that room. Because you're not going to want to go in with Witherspoon, Joby, and a guy like Michael Jackson as your corners. That's
no,
weak.
yeah, you wouldn't want to do that. You'd want, you if you were to move on from Woolen, even if you bring Michael Jackson back in, um,
And
you're
and
going.
and I will say this: the only way you could move off of Woolen at this stage of his career with this cheap of a contract is you realize he was never going to fit your scheme and never develop better than he currently was, and you could trade him for an asset. Like you can't just let be cut Woolen, for
Oh no,
example.
you wouldn't cut him. Not he's way too cheap for how good he is. You
Yes,
wouldn't cut him. If you're moving on from him, it's because you've decided that he's not a scheme fit. He's not physical enough at the line and against the
he
run,
can't
and so you,
tackle. Right, right.
and so you're looking for moving on to a guy that can do that better for you, Tre'Davious Ward or um, maybe even a Jaquan McMillan, someone who can come in and replace that. but then you're also bringing in a guy like Michael Jackson who could give you some depth, be maybe that outside guy when you are going cover two and you need someone up near the line of scrimmage to be super physical, right? So there's situational. I could see the team going, and if you're gonna move on from Woolen, bringing in a pair of guys, um, and try to do it that way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, so there again, this is an interesting roster building exercise because it is somewhat what is better. We weren't a terrible defense towards the end. If you put the last 8 games in a box on Seattle's defense, we're close to a top 5 defense in a bunch of different categories, and you're
Not
not
even
going to
close
move
to it.
off it.
They're top 5 defense overall.
And
The
you're not
last
going to
8
move off
games.
a bunch of guys that were working, in your defense, except for a few select guys, and you're really just trying to upgrade a little bit on the peripheral, and some scheme stuff and some rotation guys.
And
But
you
the
got to,
defense is pretty well set.
but you got to get Ernest Jones back, because if you don't get Ernest
That
Jones
is
back,
the key cog, isn't it? Is it?
you don't have that top 5 defense. Because you saw what it was like when he wasn't in there. It just was not pretty.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I'm
and
excited, but I think they end up spending the majority of their money on the offensive side of the ball. And I think they spend the majority of their draft capital on the offensive side. I just get that sense this year. I could be completely wrong. They could go all in on making their defense a number one defense and just really solidify a couple of key spots. I think second corner, and a third safety, and depth at linebacker, and a premier pass rusher in the draft, and a
especially someone
defensive
who,
tackle, like a just a road grader kind of guy. That defense would be really exciting to watch.
well, yeah, and you're going to win a lot of games 6-3. Um,
That's true.
because you can't
Well, I
do
do all
anything if you,
that, but also, get a serious candidate to play left guard. Like go out and spend the other pile of money that you have, the other half of your free agent spending would be on one player, man. You go all in on, red 32 and get your left guard of the future, if you, and go get Trey Smith or whatever. Like that to me would make the team.
I don't know. I mean, yes, but at the same time,
It's always scary throwing money at one player. I get that, but my goodness,
yeah.
let's tell the truth here. If we had Trey Smith on our roster, you'd feel a lot better about the offense in
Oh, I feel a lot
2025.
better about the offense. And I feel a lot better about the offense, right? I feel better about the offensive line going into next year than this year, because I think we know that both of our tackles are going to be healthy, rather
Wow.
than you know what I mean? So Abe Lucas was able to play down the stretch and continue to get better uh, as the season went, as he's battling back from that knee injury. Um,
Yeah, but the
but
Seahawks are really going to have a swing tackle that is a hedge against Charles Cross leaving next year, not in 2025, but in 2026, and a hedge against Abe Lucas not being able to make it through training camp or even as a full season.
well, there's no reason to even hedge against uh, Cross yet. Just exercise your 5th-year option on him. He's a first-round pick.
Yeah,
Um, and then you get to keep him, and you get to keep him at what will be a fairly discounted rate, because his cost on the open market is going to be way more than that number. So it's worth it to exercise it and hold on to him that way. So I think that actually gives the Seahawks some leverage. If they wanted to go in and negotiate an extension with him, they're like, look, we can exercise your 5th-year option, and we know we're going to get you for $14 million next year. So we don't need to go pay you 21. And give them some leverage to get a deal done long term that benefits them, short term, and locks him in. Um, and yeah, I mean, it comes down to, honestly, Lucas's knee has been problematic, but from what we saw late in the season, he kept getting better there at right
yeah,
tackle. And which means it's getting stronger, and it wasn't like degrading and getting worse. It was getting better. So I feel a lot more confident about that. Some of the problem early in the year, as far as the offensive line, was right tackle was terrible. I mean, Stone Forsythe was the worst offensive lineman on the group, and that's a group that had Bradford in it. So, and who honestly is really bad himself. So, getting Abe Lucas back really did matter, and so I feel better about that. And if they can get another guy, especially even if it's not Trey Smith, but a guy that's competent to a point where like being a fringy Pro Bowl type guy, just one of those guys
like
in the middle would make
Tevin
a huge
Jenkins,
difference.
Yeah.
Add Josh Myers at center, and you could go out there and do all right, but I still think that this is they need a tight end. They need at least one, probably two wide receivers, one of which needs to be able to produce in year one. As the third, wide receiver, the chain mover and that kind of stuff. Like, this offense does need help more than just a guard.
I agree.
So, investing everything and going, we're going to have the number one defense, and leaving the offense to, pick up scraps.
Fester.
You're gonna win a lot of 6-3 games. So,
hey, winning in the NFL is winning, man. I don't care.
It is, but
no, I like a good offense, but I love a good defense.
I know.
We'll see how that balances out this year.
I think you're gonna love the Seahawks next year. I think that defense is gonna be what it looked like the last 8 or 9 games all year, and it's gonna be fun.
Plus an enhanced offense with a new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, plus an offense that's mildly competent
and balanced. Yeah, fun. Okay, let's get out of here. I'm trying to remember what our next show is, Keith. We're probably ended up talking about the offensive coordinator hire. But
I highly anticipate
in fact,
that being our next show.
That's what I have as listed as our next show. And I wrote this out about 3 weeks ago, and I have our next show is Thursday, the 22nd. Offensive coordinator hire. What can we expect?
That's our next show. So it's your fault that they haven't hired anyone yet. That's how this works.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, let me refresh my news feeds here and see if something came in.
You know how this works. Nothing will have happened. It will be
nothing's happened
in a half an hour, though.
Yes. Right. So we're ending at about 12:30 on Monday afternoon, and nothing's happened as of that moment. So, All right. Find Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at Blue Sky at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platforms and our YouTube channel. And you guys know what to do with all that information. Just find us and like us and subscribe and comment, all that good stuff. So we'll see you guys next time, hopefully with good news on the OC search front. And we'll talk to you soon. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.